The autumn rain pelted against the windows of Clarence's house as Charles sat in his study, staring at the documents spread across his mahogany desk. The papers seemed to mock him with their neat, official typeface, each line containing revelations that shattered everything he thought he knew about the woman he had married. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his reading glasses, though whether from age or emotion, he couldn't tell. The investigation had begun innocently enough. A routine review of charitable foundation accounts had uncovered discrepancies that led to deeper inquiries. What started as simple financial oversight had evolved into something far more complex and personal. Charles had initially dismissed the concerns raised by his private secretary, believing them to be administrative errors or misunderstandings. However, as weeks turned into months, the evidence became impossible to ignore. Camilla had been absent from the house for 3 days, attending what she claimed were charitable events in Scotland. Charles had grown suspicious of these frequent trips, particularly when he noticed inconsistencies in her stories upon return. The details never quite aligned, and her usual warmth seemed forced, as if she were playing a role rather than simply being herself. The first document that caught his attention was a bank statement showing regular transfers to an account he didn't recognize. The amounts weren't enormous, but they were consistent and deliberate. Each transaction was carefully timed to coincide with Camilla's absences from London. Charles had initially assumed these might be related to her personal charitable work, something she preferred to keep private. Many members of the royal family maintained discreet philanthropic activities away from public scrutiny. However, when he cross-referenced these dates with official royal schedules, disturbing patterns emerged. On several occasions, Camilla had claimed to be attending one event while the financial records suggested she was somewhere entirely different. The transactions originated from locations across England, sometimes hundreds of miles from her supposed whereabouts. Charles remembered the conversation they had just weeks earlier about transparency and trust. Camilla had spoken eloquently about the importance of honesty in their relationship, especially given the public scrutiny they faced. She had emphasized how their marriage needed to be built on complete openness, free from the secrets that had plagued his previous relationships. The irony wasn't lost on him now. The second document was more troubling. It appeared to be correspondence between Camilla and someone identified only as Mar. The letters were written in Camilla's distinctive handwriting, but the content was unlike anything he had seen from her before. They spoke of arrangements and necessary precautions in language that seemed almost coded. One phrase in particular had stuck with him. Charles must never know about the real reason for these meetings. His private secretary, Sir Edmund Hartley, had presented these findings with obvious reluctance. The man had served the royal family for over 2 decades and understood the delicate nature of such revelations. Edmund had suggested that perhaps there was an innocent explanation, that maybe Camilla was planning some sort of surprise or managing personal family matters she preferred to keep private. Charles had wanted to believe this explanation. The alternative was too painful to contemplate. Throughout their long relationship, honesty had been the foundation of their connection. Even during the difficult years when they were apart, they had maintained complete transparency with each other. The idea that Camilla might be deliberately deceiving him felt like a betrayal of everything they had built together. The third document changed everything. It was a photograph, apparently taken by a private investigator, showing Camilla entering a small cottage in the Cotswolds. The image was time-stamped during one of her supposed charity visits to Edinburgh. Standing beside her was a man Charles didn't recognize, someone who appeared to be in his 50s with graying hair and an expensive overcoat. The body language in the photograph suggested familiarity, perhaps even intimacy. Charles had stared at that photograph for hours, trying to find an innocent explanation. Perhaps the man was a charity administrator or a family friend she had mentioned, but he had forgotten. However, when he reviewed their recent conversations, no such person had been discussed. Camilla was typically thorough in her explanations of new acquaintances, particularly those involved in her charitable work. The investigation had been conducted with utmost discretion. Charles had insisted that only Edmund and one trusted security officer be involved. They couldn't risk any information leaking to the press, regardless of what they discovered. The media's obsession with royal scandals meant that even innocent misunderstandings could be twisted into sensational headlines. As the evidence accumulated, Charles found himself questioning everything about his relationship with Camilla. Were there other secrets he was unaware of? Had she been deceiving him about other matters? The foundation of trust they had built over decades suddenly felt fragile and uncertain. The fourth document was perhaps the most damaging. It was a rental agreement for a property in Bath, signed by Camilla under a slightly different name. The lease had been active for over 2 years, yet Charles had no knowledge of any property she might need in that area. The address corresponded with several of the mysterious financial transactions, suggesting she had been regularly visiting this location. Charles had driven to Bath himself, something that required considerable planning given his security requirements. He had observed the property from a distance, noting its modest appearance and residential setting. It wasn't the sort of place where official royal business would be conducted, nor did it seem suitable for charitable activities. The house appeared to be a private residence, well-maintained but unremarkable. During his surveillance, Charles had seen Camilla arrive at the property. She appeared relaxed and comfortable, using her own key to enter. This wasn't a formal visit or business meeting. She clearly felt at home there. The realization that she maintained a secret residence, a place where she could go without his knowledge, was deeply unsettling. The emotional impact of these discoveries was overwhelming. Charles found himself unable to sleep, spending long hours in his study reviewing the evidence and trying to understand what it all meant. His relationship with Camilla had survived so many challenges over the years. They had weathered public criticism, family disapproval, and intense media scrutiny. The idea that it might not survive her deception was heartbreaking. He had also begun to notice changes in Camilla's behavior that he had previously overlooked. She seemed more distracted during their conversations, often checking her phone or appearing lost in thought. Her explanations for her whereabouts had become more elaborate, filled with details that seemed unnecessary unless she was trying to establish an alibi. The staff at Clarence House had also begun to make subtle comments about Camilla's schedule. The housekeeper mentioned that Camilla had been requesting packed lunches for journeys that supposedly involved formal dinners. The chauffeur noted that she often asked to be dropped at locations different from her stated destinations. These observations, individually insignificant, formed a pattern when viewed together. Charles had considered confronting Camilla immediately upon discovering the first evidence. However, Edmund had counseled patience, suggesting that a hasty confrontation might lead to explanations that weren't entirely truthful. If Camilla was indeed hiding something significant, she would need time to prepare a response that minimized the damage to their relationship. The waiting had been torture. Charles found himself analyzing every conversation, every gesture, every expression for signs of deception. Their intimate moments felt hollow, overshadowed by his growing suspicions. The woman who had been his closest companion for so many years suddenly felt like a stranger. The investigation had also revealed financial irregularities beyond the mysterious transfers. Camilla had been making cash withdrawals from accounts Charles didn't know existed. The amount suggested she was funding activities that required untraceable payments. This level of financial secrecy was completely out of character for someone who had always been open about her spending. As he sat in his study that rainy evening, Charles realized that their relationship had reached a critical juncture. The evidence before him demanded an explanation, and he could no longer pretend that innocent reasons existed for such elaborate deception. The woman he loved and trusted had been living a double life, and he needed to understand why. The decision to confront Camilla hadn't been easy. Charles understood that their conversation would forever change their relationship, regardless of her explanations. Once trust is questioned, it becomes fragile, requiring constant reinforcement rather than existing as an assumed foundation. Their marriage would either emerge stronger from this crisis or be irreparably damaged by it. Charles had planned the confrontation carefully. He would present the evidence methodically, allowing Camilla opportunities to explain each discrepancy before moving to the next. He hoped that her responses would reveal innocent explanations he had overlooked, that his suspicions would prove unfounded. However, he was also prepared for the possibility that his worst fears would be confirmed. The sound of Camilla's car, pulling into the driveway, interrupted his thoughts. She was returning from another of her mysterious trips, this one supposedly to visit a women's shelter in Manchester. Charles had already confirmed that no such visit had been scheduled, that the shelter's administrator had no knowledge of any planned royal engagement. This lie would be the first item he would address when she joined him in the study. As her footsteps approached, Charles felt a mixture of dread and relief. The waiting was finally over. Within the next hour, he would either discover that his fears were groundless or confirm that the woman he loved had been systematically deceiving him. Either way, their relationship would never be the same. The door to his study opened, and Camilla appeared with her usual warm smile. She began to share details of her supposed trip, unaware that Charles possessed evidence contradicting every word she spoke. As she continued her fabricated account, Charles felt the last vestiges of doubt disappear. The confrontation he had dreaded was about to begin, and, with it, the most difficult conversation of their long relationship. Camilla settled into the leather armchair across from Charles's desk, still glowing with the satisfaction of what she believed had been another successful deception. She began recounting her supposed visit to Manchester, describing in elaborate detail the women's shelter that existed only in her imagination. Her voice carried the practiced confidence of someone who had told similar lies many times before. Charles listened to every word, his face carefully neutral despite the growing anger building inside him. Each fabricated detail felt like another small betrayal, another crack in the foundation of their relationship. When Camilla mentioned meeting with the shelter director, a woman whose name she had clearly invented, Charles felt something snap inside him. "Stop," he said quietly, his voice cutting through her narrative like a blade. Camilla paused mid-sentence, surprised by the interruption. She had grown accustomed to Charles's patient attention during her travel stories, his apparent acceptance of her explanations. The single word carried a weight that immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. "I said stop, Camilla." Charles's voice was stronger now, filled with an authority she hadn't heard before. "I know you weren't in Manchester today. I know there was no visit to any women's shelter. I know you're lying to me." The color drained from Camilla's face as the implications of his words sank in. For a moment, she considered maintaining the pretense, perhaps claiming he had misunderstood her schedule. However, something in his expression told her that denial would be futile. Charles reached for the first document on his desk, holding it up so she could see the bank statement with its highlighted transactions. "Perhaps you'd like to explain these regular payments to an account I've never heard of? Payments that coincidentally occur whenever you're supposedly away on charitable business." Camilla's hands began to tremble slightly as she recognized the document. She had been so careful to use a different bank to ensure that these transactions wouldn't appear on their joint statements. The realization that Charles had been investigating her financial activities was both shocking and humiliating. "Charles, I can explain," she began, but he held up his hand to silence her. Can you? Can you explain why you've been systematically lying to me for months, possibly years?" His voice was rising now, the careful control beginning to slip. "Can you explain why you maintain a secret residence in Bath under an assumed name?" The mention of the Bath property hit Camilla like a physical blow. That house represented her most carefully guarded secret, the one place where she could be completely herself without the constraints of royal protocol. The fact that Charles knew about it meant his investigation had been far more thorough than she had imagined. Charles stood and moved around the desk, bringing himself closer to where Camilla sat. The physical proximity made the confrontation more intense, more personal. "I've seen the photographs, Camilla. I've seen you with him. Who is he? Who is this man you meet with while you're supposedly visiting charity organizations?" Camilla's composure finally cracked. Tears began to form in her eyes, not just from shame, but from the realization that the carefully constructed world she had built was collapsing around her. His name is Michael Richardson, she whispered. He was my first love. Before you, before everything else. The admission hung in the air between them like a toxic cloud. Charles had suspected another relationship, but hearing it confirmed was still devastating. Your first love? And you've been seeing him behind my back for how long? 2 years, Camilla replied, her voice barely audible. We reconnected by accident at a function in Bath. I never meant for it to continue, but you chose to continue anyway, Charles finished coldly. You chose to lie to me, to deceive me, to make a fool of me while I trusted you completely. Charles returned to his desk and picked up another document, this one containing excerpts from Camilla's correspondence with Michael. These letters speak of love, Camilla. They speak of a future together. They speak of planning around when Charles is no longer a factor. The quotes from her own letters struck Camilla like physical blows. She had written those words during moments of weakness, when the constraints of royal life had seemed overwhelming. Seeing them quoted back to her in Charles's voice made them seem even more treacherous than she had intended. You don't understand, Camilla said desperately. The pressure of this life, the constant scrutiny, the expectations, sometimes I needed to escape. Michael represented a world where I could just be myself, where I wasn't constantly watched and judged. Charles's anger exploded at her attempt to justify her actions. Don't you dare blame our life together for your betrayal. Every royal spouse faces those pressures. Diana faced them, and she didn't maintain a secret relationship behind my back. The comparison to Diana was particularly painful for Camilla. She had always been sensitive about following in Diana's footsteps, about the constant comparisons the media made between them. To have Charles throw Diana's memory in her face during this confrontation felt deliberately cruel. Diana had other problems, Camilla shot back, immediately regretting her words. I'm sorry, I didn't mean don't, Charles warned, his voice dangerous. Don't you dare disparage Diana's memory to justify your own betrayal. At least she was honest about her struggles. At least she didn't live a double life while pretending to love me. The room fell silent except for the sound of rain against the windows. Both Charles and Camilla were breathing heavily, the emotional intensity of the confrontation taking its toll on them both. The careful politeness that had characterized their relationship for so many years had been stripped away, revealing raw emotions neither had expressed before. Charles picked up the rental agreement for the bathhouse and waved it at her. This property, how long have you been maintaining it? How many lies have you told to cover it up? 3 years, Camilla admitted. I needed somewhere to go, somewhere that felt like home rather than a museum. The bathhouse is simple, normal. I can cook my own meals, watch television without protocol officers, just exist without performing. And Michael? How does he fit into this need for normalcy? Charles's voice was bitter with sarcasm. Camilla took a shaky breath before answering. Michael understands who I was before all this. He remembers when I was just Camilla Parker Bowles, not the Duchess of Cornwall. With him, I don't have to be perfect or appropriate. I can be messy and emotional and human. You can be human with me. Charles exploded. You were human with me for decades before we married. What changed? Why did you suddenly need someone else to feel authentic? The question struck at the heart of Camilla's motivations, forcing her to confront feelings she had been avoiding for years. Because with you, I'm always conscious of being watched, of being judged. Even in our most private moments, I know that everything I do reflects on the monarchy. With Michael, there's no history, no baggage, no expectations. Charles stared at her, trying to process her explanation. So our entire marriage has been a performance for you? Every intimate moment, every shared laugh, every time you said you loved me, all of it was just playing a role. No, Camilla cried, finally showing real emotion. My love for you is real, Charles. It always has been. But love and freedom aren't the same thing. I love you, but I need to breathe. I need to have parts of my life that aren't subject to royal approval. Charles felt like he was seeing Camilla clearly for the first time in years. The woman he had married had apparently been suffocating in their life together. But instead of discussing her feelings with him, She had chosen to create an elaborate secret world. How many others know about this? Charles asked, his voice tired now rather than angry. How many people are aware that the Duchess of Cornwall maintains a secret relationship and a hidden residence? Camilla hesitated before answering. Michael knows, obviously. And Sarah. You remember Sarah Henderson from my Wiltshire days? She helps me coordinate the arrangements. She handles the financial transfers and manages the correspondence. The revelation that others were involved, that there was an entire network of people helping Camilla deceive him, felt like another betrayal. Charles had prided himself on the loyalty of those around him, on the tight circle of trust that protected the royal family's privacy. Sarah Henderson has been stealing from royal accounts to fund your affair. Charles's voice was incredulous. Not stealing, Camilla protested. I have personal allowances, discretionary funds. The money is technically mine to use as I see fit. But the deception isn't, Charles countered. The lies aren't. The systematic campaign to make me look like a fool isn't acceptable just because you used your own money to fund it. Charles walked to the window, staring out at the rain-soaked garden. Do you have any idea what this will do to us if it becomes public? Do you understand the damage to the monarchy, to everything we've worked to build together? Camilla wiped her eyes with a tissue from her purse. I never meant for it to go this far. In the beginning, it was just coffee with an old friend. But Michael was going through his own difficulties. His wife had died. He was lonely. And I found myself wanting to comfort him. And when did comforting him become betraying me? Charles asked without turning around. It happened gradually, Camilla admitted. One conversation led to another. One meeting led to the next. Before I knew it, I was looking forward to our time together more than anything else in my life. It felt like coming home to myself. Charles turned back to face her, his expression a mixture of pain and disgust. And you never once considered discussing these feelings with me? Your husband? The man you supposedly love? Camilla met his gaze directly for the first time since the confrontation began. Would you have understood? Would you have been willing to change our life to accommodate my need for privacy and normalcy? Or would you have seen it as weakness, as inability to handle royal duties? The question forced Charles to examine his own role in their relationship's deterioration. Had he been so focused on royal obligations that he had ignored Camilla's personal needs? Had his expectations been unreasonable? But even as he considered these possibilities, his anger returned. We'll never know, will we? Because you chose deception over communication. You chose betrayal over trust. You decided that I wasn't worthy of honesty. The confrontation had reached a crucial point. Both Charles and Camilla understood that their relationship would never return to what it had been. The trust that had sustained them through so many challenges was broken, perhaps irreparably. Whatever happened next would determine whether their marriage could survive this crisis or whether it would become another casualty of royal life's pressures. Charles returned to his desk and gathered the documents that had exposed Camilla's deception. I need to know everything, he said firmly. Every detail of this relationship, every lie you've told, every person who's been involved. I need complete honesty from you, for the first time in years. Camilla nodded, understanding that her only chance of salvaging their marriage lay in absolute transparency. The comfortable world of lies and secrets she had constructed was gone forever, replaced by the harsh light of truth and judgment. The silence stretched between them as Charles waited for Camilla to begin her confession. She sat hunched in the armchair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, struggling to find words adequate to explain years of deception. The weight of her secrets, so carefully guarded for so long, now seemed overwhelming. Michael and I met again completely by chance, she finally began, her voice hoarse from crying. It was at the Bath Literary Festival 3 years ago. I was there for a charity event, and he was attending as a patron of the local library. We literally bumped into each other in the book tent. Charles listened without interruption, though every word felt like another small cut. He had attended that same festival with Camilla, had watched her work the crowd with her usual charm and grace. To think that she had been reconnecting with a former lover while while he stood just meters away was almost unbearable. At first, it really was innocent, Camilla continued. We had coffee and talked about old times, about what our lives had become. Michael had retired from banking, lost his wife to cancer 2 years earlier. He seemed so lost, so different from the confident young man I had once known. And you felt compelled to comfort him, Charles said coldly. How thoughtful of you to console your former lover while your husband stood nearby, completely unaware. Camilla flinched at his tone, but pressed on. It wasn't like that, Charles. You were busy with the other patrons, completely absorbed in your conversations about architecture and gardening. Michael and I only spoke for 20 minutes, exchanged phone numbers because he mentioned needing advice about charitable giving. But 20 minutes led to more contact, Charles observed. Yes, Camilla admitted. He called a few weeks later, asking about reputable charities. We talked for over an hour about various organizations, about the importance of personal involvement rather than just writing checks. He seemed so eager to do something meaningful with his life. Charles could picture the conversation, could imagine Camilla's genuine enthusiasm for charitable work gradually drawing her deeper into communication with Michael. Her passion for helping others was one of the qualities he most admired about her, but it had apparently also been the gateway to her betrayal. When did charity advice become personal meetings? Charles asked. Camilla took a shaky breath. Michael invited me to visit a local hospice he was considering supporting. It was in Bath, close to where he lived. I agreed because I thought it would be helpful for him to have an experienced guide through the process of charity selection. And you didn't think to mention this meeting to me? I should have, Camilla acknowledged. But you were dealing with the parliamentary crisis about the Commonwealth realms, completely overwhelmed with constitutional matters. I didn't want to bother you with something so routine. Charles remembered that period clearly. The complex negotiations about the future structure of the Commonwealth had consumed months of his time and attention. He had indeed been distracted, often working late into the night, and traveling frequently for consultations. Perhaps Camilla's feelings of neglect hadn't been entirely unfounded. The hospice visit went well, Camilla continued. Michael made a substantial donation, and we discussed other potential charitable projects. Afterward, he invited me for lunch at a small restaurant in Bath. It seemed harmless enough, just two old friends catching up over a meal. But it wasn't harmless, Charles pointed out, because you didn't tell me about it. No, I didn't, Camilla agreed. And I can't entirely explain why. Perhaps because I knew you might not understand, might see it as inappropriate. Or perhaps because I was enjoying having a secret, something that was entirely my own. The admission that she had deliberately chosen secrecy was particularly painful for Charles. It suggested that her deception hadn't been accidental or gradual, but conscious from the very beginning. What happened at this lunch that made you decide to continue seeing him? Charles asked. Camilla's expression grew distant, as if she were reliving the memory. Michael told me about his loneliness, about how empty his life had felt since his wife died. He said that talking with me had reminded him of who he used to be before grief changed him. He made me feel useful in a way that had nothing to do with royal duties or public expectations. And you found this appealing, Charles observed. Yes, Camilla said simply. For one afternoon, I wasn't the Duchess of Cornwall or a royal patron or a public figure. I was just Camilla, listening to a friend's problems and offering comfort. It felt wonderfully normal. Charles began to pace the room, trying to process the psychology behind Camilla's choices. So you decided to meet with him again? Not immediately, Camilla replied. Several weeks passed before we spoke again. But when we did, Michael mentioned that he had taken my advice about the hospice and was looking into supporting a children's charity as well. He asked if I would help him evaluate potential organizations. Charles stopped pacing and looked directly at her. And instead of referring him to the appropriate Royal Foundation staff, you decided to handle it personally. Yes, Camilla admitted. I told myself it was because personal attention would be more effective, that Michael would benefit from individual guidance rather than bureaucratic processes. But truthfully, I wanted to see him again. The honesty of this admission was both refreshing and devastating. Charles appreciated that Camilla was finally being truthful about her motivations, but the truth was more hurtful than the lies had been. "How often were you meeting during this period?" Charles asked. "Once every few weeks at first," Camilla replied. "Always with some charitable pretext, always in public places like museums or galleries. I convinced myself that it was legitimate work, that I was providing valuable service to someone who genuinely needed guidance." When did the charitable meetings become personal ones? Camilla hesitated before answering. Michael's birthday was in November, about 6 months after we reconnected. He mentioned feeling particularly lonely on that day, missing his late wife. I suggested meeting for tea to help him through the difficult anniversary. Charles could see where this was leading. And the tea meeting was different from the charity consultations? Very different, Camilla confirmed. We barely talked about charitable work at all. Instead, we shared memories of our younger days, before either of us was married, when life seemed simpler. Michael made me laugh in ways I had forgotten were possible. "You laughed," Charles repeated flatly. "With me, you're formal and dutiful, but with him, you laugh." "It's not that simple," Camilla protested. "With you, I'm always conscious of being appropriate, of not embarrassing the crown or failing in my duties. With Michael, I could be silly, imperfect human." Charles felt a surge of anger at her characterization of their relationship. "Are you saying that our marriage prevents you from being human?" "No," Camilla said quickly. "I'm saying that our marriage comes with responsibilities that make spontaneity and imperfection dangerous. Everything I do reflects on you and the monarchy. The pressure to be constantly appropriate is exhausting." For a moment, Charles found himself understanding Camilla's perspective. The royal lifestyle did indeed require constant vigilance about public appearances and appropriate behavior. Perhaps he had been insensitive to how burdensome she found these expectations. But his sympathy was quickly replaced by renewed anger. "So instead of discussing these feelings with me, you decided to escape them through deception." "I didn't plan it that way," Camilla said defensively. "The relationship with Michael evolved gradually. By the time I realized how important he had become to me, stopping seemed impossible." "When did you realize you had romantic feelings for him again?" Camilla stared at her hands before answering. "Christmas, about 18 months ago. Michael gave me a small gift, a book of poetry we had both enjoyed when we were young. Inside, he had written a note saying that knowing me again had brought joy back into his life. And you reciprocated these feelings?" "Eventually, yes," Camilla whispered. "Not immediately, but over the following weeks, I found myself thinking about him constantly. Our conversations became more intimate, more personal. We started discussing our regrets about the past, our wishes for the future." Charles sat down heavily in his chair, the full weight of Camilla's betrayal settling on him. "When did the emotional affair become physical?" Camilla's silence was answer enough, but Charles pressed on. "I need to know, Camilla. I need to understand exactly what I'm dealing with." "Last spring," she finally admitted, "Michael had been unwell, nothing serious, but enough to worry me. I visited him at his home to check on his recovery. He was so grateful for my concern, so touched that I had come. When I left, he kissed me goodbye. And you didn't stop him." "No," Camilla said simply. "I kissed him back." The admission hung between them like a toxic cloud. Charles had suspected physical intimacy, but hearing it confirmed was still devastating. The woman he had trusted completely had been sharing intimate moments with another man for months. "How often?" Charles asked, his voice barely controlled. "Not often," Camilla replied. "Perhaps once a month, when we could arrange private meetings. Usually at his home, or sometimes at the bathhouse after I acquired it." Charles picked up the rental agreement again. "Tell me about this property. Why did you need a secret house?" "Michael suggested it," Camilla explained. "He said that meeting at his home was too risky, that neighbors might recognize me and cause gossip. The bathhouse provided a neutral location where we could spend time together without fear of discovery." "Spend time together," Charles repeated sarcastically. "Is that what we're calling adultery now?" Camilla's composure cracked again. I know how it sounds, Charles. I know how wrong it was. But I felt trapped in our life, suffocated by the constant expectations. With Michael, I could breathe again. You felt trapped, Charles said incredulously. You felt trapped in a marriage to the future king of England, in a life of privilege and purpose that millions of people dream about. Yes, Camilla said defiantly. Privilege doesn't eliminate loneliness, Charles. Purpose doesn't replace genuine affection. I felt like I was slowly disappearing into a role rather than living as a person. Charles stared at her, trying to reconcile this revelation with a woman he thought he knew. Had their entire marriage been a mistake? Had Camilla been unhappy from the beginning, simply going through the motions of royal duty while yearning for something else entirely? What did you and Michael discuss during these secret meetings? Charles asked. Did you share details about our private life? About state matters? About royal family business? Never, Camilla said firmly. I was always careful to keep those worlds separate. Michael knows nothing about confidential matters or private family issues. But he knows about your feelings, Charles pointed out. He knows that you're unhappy in your marriage to me. Camilla nodded reluctantly. Yes, he knows about my struggles with royal life. But I never betrayed actual secrets or confidential information. Charles wasn't sure whether to be relieved or further insulted by this distinction. The fact that Camilla had maintained some boundaries was somewhat reassuring, but her willingness to discuss their marriage with another man felt like another form of betrayal.